In the microphone. Hi, I'm Tricia Hudson with Oxford University Press. Thank you all for joining us today for navigating research. Do scholarly reference resources still meet users' needs? We at OUP, just this time last year, kicked off a large qualitative research project to look at how users at different levels, be it undergraduates, graduate students, faculty, researchers, and librarians supporting them, understand reference resources, how they discover them and how they don't discover them, and how they use those reference resources and at what point of the scholarly journey. So I'm very excited today to be joined by my colleague Simon Pawley from our UK-based market research team, as well as Dave Tykeson from Cal State Fresno. Tykeson from Cal State Fresno, who's going to be joining us. Simon's going to be speaking about the white paper and the research project in more depth, and then Dave will be responding to the white paper and talking about some of his observations and how those relate to some analysis he's been doing at Cal State Fresno. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Simon.
Thanks very much, Tricia. Thank you all very much for coming along. So what I'm going to do is just kind of give a summary of the research that we conducted in the market research team and give an overview of the key findings. And I'm going to be focusing particularly on how changes in the academic information environment are affecting and impacting on reference resources. Okay, so just to start off with an overview of the research that we conducted. In order to keep the scope of the project focused, our research concentrated on universities and colleges in North America and the UK. Now, it's likely that the trends that we identified are also affecting other types of institutions, like community colleges and schools, and also institutions in other countries. However, those institutions also have their own peculiarities, and they didn't form part of this phase of our research. So the research began with a review of existing literature to establish the state of knowledge on the subject and to identify topics for exploration. These topics were then explored in a series of in-depth, semi-structured interviews. In order to gain a range of perspectives, we conducted interviews with faculty and students as well as with librarians. These interviews are the source of the quotations that I'm going to be sharing on my slides today, and more of them appear in the published white paper. Now, based on the themes that came up in the interviews, we then conducted a survey of librarians from academic institutions in the UK and North America, and the survey is the source of the charts that are going to appear in the presentation. This slide shows a breakdown of our interview sample for the in-depth interviews. A total of 34 interviewees were drawn from institutions ranging from research-intensive universities with large research libraries to more teaching-focused universities through to liberal arts colleges. Although our sample was not statistically representative, what it provided us with was an indicative picture of a range of use cases for reference sources, and that supported the exploratory approach that we wanted to take in this study. Okay, this slide sums up the key drivers of change in relation to reference that the study identified. In a moment, I'm going to go into some more depth on each of these 4 points, but this just kind of provides an outline of the key points to give you a framework for the presentation. Okay, so first point, basic factual information is freely available online. So the areas where published scholarly reference can offer something unique are shifting towards more specialized content and to in-depth overviews of topics and fields of scholarship. The second point, the focus of scholarly research publications is becoming more and more specialized all the time. And that makes these publications harder for outsiders to understand, for non-specialists. What that does is it generates growing needs for all users for guidance to areas of scholarship that are relevant to their work, but which are unfamiliar to them. Third point, related to this, interdisciplinary research and teaching is becoming more and more significant all the time. And again, as users need to engage with other disciplines, they need introductory guidance to key topics of interest and the relevant scholarship around them. The final point, we found that users really are decreasingly recognizing or thinking about reference as a category of resources. Users we spoke to describe needs that can be met by appropriate reference content, needs for guidance to unfamiliar topics, but they often don't know where they might find that kind of guidance, and they don't really have a concept of reference resources that might provide it. That seems to be particularly true for undergraduate students, but the declining significance of the reference category was observed amongst graduate students and some faculty as well. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to say a little bit more about each of those 4 points in turn. And I'm going to begin with a point about factual material. So, in the earliest stages of researching a new topic, users need basic background information and terminology. At this stage of their work, they're looking to get the essential information as quickly as possible so that they can move on with their work. Some users who we spoke to suggested to us that the reliability of the information they found at this stage is not really of crucial importance, so long as it can help them to identify scholarly materials relevant to their topic, they can then rely on those scholarly materials to check the factual details. Because speed and efficiency are so important to users, they tend to turn to sources where they're confident that they can find relevant material. And that's why a resource like Wikipedia is so popular. It's very fast to access, almost all users are familiar with it, so they can be pretty sure about what kind of information they're going to find there. As one undergraduate student told us, Wikipedia is a place for me to start to figure out what I should be searching for. Now, that is probably the reason why many librarians reported relatively low usage levels for subject dictionaries compared to other types of reference resources. Now, it should be noted that a category like subject dictionaries encompasses a range of resources, and within that category, there's likely to be a bit of variation. But nevertheless, the comparison across these kind of broad categories gives a useful indication of the key trend as we see it, which is that generally speaking, users are turning to free online searches for factual information, while for more in-depth content, they're turning to things like subject encyclopedias and handbooks. Now, for those, there really are fewer alternative resources that are freely available online, and that's probably why the usage levels in those categories seem to be a little bit higher. Okay, in our in-depth interviews, users described moving through a number of stages in the research process, beginning with establishing factual background and terminology, and then moving on to defining a specific research question and exploring a topic in greater depth. As they focused in on their chosen topic, users described the need for detailed guidance to the key issues in a particular field of study and the scholarship relating to them. We identified two trends that seem to be making the needs for such guidance more acute over time. One is the growing rate of research publications on any given topic and their increasingly narrow and specialized scope. The other is the growing significance of interdisciplinary work, not only for researchers, but also in teaching and learning. So to look at both of those in a little bit more depth. The increasingly specialized nature of research publications, as well as their proliferating numbers, makes them difficult for those who are not experts on the topic to navigate or evaluate. Moreover, although web-scale search is a powerful tool that can help users to identify a wide range of resources using keyword searches, users who we spoke to described difficulties in working through a lengthy results list and identifying what are the most relevant and important materials for their topic. Some users, like the one quoted here, described the need for resources that could help them to navigate this specialist content, but they didn't always know what kind of resource might do this or where it might be found. So this user said, I think there are a lot of times when I would appreciate something between Wikipedia level and research paper level, and it can sometimes be difficult to find it. Now, users specializing in the sciences mentioned review articles in journals as offering useful guidance to the relevant scholarship that help to identify publications relevant to their topic and those studies that were particularly influential. And we have a quote here from one of those users. Now, students in arts and humanities described similar needs, the difficulty of establishing the most relevant or most important studies and the desirability of having some guidance to these. But they tended to be unsure of where they might look for that kind of guidance. And in some cases, they didn't even seem to be aware that such resources existed that might help them with this problem. Okay, interdisciplinary work is becoming ever more common, as I've said, not only in terms of research projects, but it's increasingly shaping teaching programs as well. The growing numbers of users who are engaged in interdisciplinary work face a need to engage with certain key themes in an unfamiliar subject area, almost always working within a limited time frame. Now, users described various use cases for this kind of content. It might be that they just need some background to put something into context. It might be that they're looking for a reasonably brief and self-contained overview of a topic. But in another use case, if the topic is more central to some research that they're undertaking, then they may be looking for a resource to offer some guidance as they explore that topic in greater depth. So, resources that provide an overview of the topic itself and also offer some guidance to the scholarship relating to it can give users the option of either getting a quick summary or exploring further, depending on what they need in any particular instance. Here again, users describe this engagement with unfamiliar subjects as a challenging situation in which contextual guidance would be very beneficial, but they didn't always know where to find that guidance. And the limitations on their time meant that they were not able to undertake a prolonged search for that kind of content. This chart, which again asked librarians about the needs of their users, suggests that handbooks and bibliographical resources which serve this more detailed exploration of unfamiliar topics are more important resources for graduate students and faculty. And that seems to fit with the suggestion that while needs for published reference content may be declining for basic factual material, needs for more detailed contextual guidance to fields of study remain significant, and perhaps particularly for researchers. Okay, so just to kind of sum up the key points, the users who took part in our interviews described a need for contextual information and guidance to help them to navigate an unfamiliar topic or body of scholarship. Librarians suggested that when users were pointed to relevant reference content, they often found it useful, and users were often grateful. However, the accounts both of librarians and of students suggest that students didn't always know where content of this kind could be found, nor were they very likely to think of reference as a category of resources that they could use. So in terms of connecting users to reference content when they require it, librarians emphasized the importance of discoverability and especially article-level indexing for reference content. However, some felt that even well-indexed resources were still not always found by users who would benefit from them, and they described using online subject guides to highlight useful resources. These kinds of projects kind of seem to be still in a rather experimental phase, and nobody's quite sure what's the best kind of way to address that. So based on our interviewees' comments, both users and librarians, it does seem that this is an ongoing process of responding to the changing needs of users within an ever-changing information environment. And as this continues to evolve, it does seem that the discovery of relevant reference content is likely to be an ongoing challenge facing users, librarians, and publishers together. Okay, that gives you an overview of our key findings. Before I hand over to Dave, I just want to mention that if you'd like to look at the research in a bit more detail, the report is freely available to download from that web address listed, oup.com/academic/navigating research. So if you're interested, please have a look. And I'm going to hand over to Dave Dickerson.
Okay, thank you, Simon. And I was an advisor to OUP on that project, so I do have a connection with the white paper. But Simon really led the research, developed the research methodology, and conducted the study. My role is to say, how does this apply to the real world? And so I'm a librarian. I was the associate dean for 10 years. I'm retiring soon. I didn't want to be an administrator anymore, so now I'm a proud reference librarian again, my first love. But during the time I was administrator, I could get people to do things for me. And we opened a new library building in 2009, 400,000 square feet. Space is not an issue for us. It's the place to be on campus. I'm very proud of the services that we offer. But one thing that we still have are print reference books. And I suspect most of you don't want to admit it, but you also have print reference books in your library. And so, since print reference books at one time were heavily used gateways to the information world, how does that play out today? Okay. Oh, this shows both of them. So navigating research, it really was an important research project, and the fact that they did essentially a focus group of interviews with students, undergrads, grads, and faculty really tells us how people think about their approach to research, and that's what I found very valuable about the report. And it sort of tells us why our sources are, I would say, are being used, but to be honest, why our sources are not being used is the real answer. So where do people do research? Two sources, neither of which were developed by us in the library world or publishers: Google and Wikipedia. That's where people start research. And this faculty member says it very well. And we've kind of created this expectation that the first thing to do if you're doing research is search. And I think as librarians, we're partially responsible for that, because we've been telling people, for decades, oh, you start by doing searching here. And we have developed our own systems. That's let's see if I can get this to work. Yeah, that's my home page, just a screenshot. And what do you see? OneSearch. By the way, we moved from the entire CSU system moved from whatever system we had to Ex Libris last summer. So that'll play in a little bit in my data here. But that, like Google, is you go in, okay, let's type something in and see what we find. So a student writing a paper will type in global warming or climate change or whatever they're doing, and they'll get stuff. But what's missing is that they're missing the overview piece. So they go to Wikipedia for that, because Wikipedia is the single most used reference tool, reference work. Google's the most used searching tool. Wikipedia is the single most consulted reference work in human history. It's where people go. And I love this quote from a master's student, because what that person is defining is a subject encyclopedia. But obviously that student did not know that there are the existence of things called subject encyclopedias. And I also answered the survey, as I hope many of you did. And so change in use of traditional reference sources, this is from the librarian side, is that, there's a lot of red there. My answers were, to be honest, were mostly in the blue. The use is 0 in the past, the use is 0 now, so it's stable. And I'd like to know who those green people are, whose use of traditional reference sources is rising significantly. But because we opened the new library and I could get people to do things, a policy. I was in charge of all the public services as the associate dean. And so when we opened the new library, I changed our culture to be more of a data-focused institution. And one way to do that, and you don't try to read all this, it's just a sample, is that every time something is used, either checked out or used in the building, before it goes back to wherever it belongs, it gets counted. And we have the ability to do that because while in the 3 years we were constructing the building, we converted everything to RFID. So to count it, at that time we were on Innovative, it was called Count Use. You just set it for Count Use, the book's over the pad, everything is counted. So I trust this data that I have. And I do it for my main interest in starting it was for reference, but we do it for everything. And so this is spreadsheet and that I update regularly. Maria and Christine still can give me the data, although this one went through June. This went through the end of Innovative for us. So, and from the begin, so it's 8 years worth of usage data. And I have all sorts of things. I get it by item, because that's how it's counted. And then I collapse it by title. And this one is sorted by most used. So this is the most used title, APA citation guides. Well, duh, you know. And I've also collapsed, you know, different editions into the same title. There is some thought that goes into this. Second most used thing is, what is that? Oh, I should look here. No, I can't read it here. The DSM. And this again is 3, 4, 5 collapsed together. It's the DSM, it's the title that's important. Third most used thing is Mental Measurements Yearbook. Even though we have it online, it's still the third most used thing. So I know what reference tools are being used. And in fact, here's a picture. These are the 20 most used reference tools from 2009 till last summer. Well, no, I took this picture in November or December, so it was up through then. So these are what's being used, and it's kind of interesting because some things you expect, the mental measurements, the Merck manual, we have a nursing program, so there's a couple health things. The regular dictionary, Korean dictionary, thesaurus, DSM. Some things, and this one's interesting. It's the California Penal Code. But what I'm using that to represent is the California Code, which we no longer have in print. We have Westlaw, and we didn't continue to subscribe, so it was getting out of date, and old legal information is not good. It's still one of the top 20, because even though there's no new usages, it was used so much. And we did have one particular user who came in for the penal code. He won't be back for a while, because he's currently in jail, and he was doing your own law, your own defense. It's probably not a good idea. The two that concern me the most are the two in the bottom right, the Encyclopedia of Wicca and Witchcraft, and another Encyclopedia of Witchcraft. People don't come to the desk for those, so I don't know if they, wave a wand or something, but those get used. And with this, I have a good sense of I have the exact sense of what's used in our collections. This table is a little bit older. This was from 2014, when the reference collection was at its largest size of, as you can see, almost 40,000 items. And I wanted to calculate the frequency of use of these things, because, how frequently should something be used to be in the reference collection, like daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly? So here's the percentages. 18% were used once on items, and 41% of titles, because, World Book's got 20 volumes or whatever, so that counts as 20 items, but one title. Annually, the items, less than 5% were used even once a year. That's not much. Titles is better, almost 15%. Quarterly, less than 1% of the items were used quarterly. 3% of the titles. Monthly, I have to look here because my mouse is covering up. Monthly, 19 items were used once a month or more. APA style guides being one of them for sure, and DSM and mental measurements. In terms of titles, 48, and weekly, nothing rose to the level of weekly. Which then makes you wonder, why do we have 40,000 items in our reference collection? I have since weeded 21,000 of those items. And this is the survey. The survey says, use of traditional reference sources by type. These are the categories. Simon told you. So I took the top 51, and it's 51 because I was doing 50, but there was a tie, so I had to put them both in, of mine. And how do mine match up with those categories? One is a bibliographic tool, 11 are dictionaries, 25 encyclopedias, 14 handbooks, which is actually very different since the bibliographic resources are the greenest from the librarian survey. They are the least used by the user survey. And sometimes when you collect this data, you find some very surprising things. Here are 4 titles, and they're ranking in the top 51. And if you had asked me, I would never have guessed that encyclopedias or dictionaries of ballet are in our highest use. And what this demonstrates is the referral nature of the use of reference. And that's also mentioned in Simon's report, that if people are referred to use things, they'll get used. So there's a class, we're not a dance school. We do have some dance students who are assigned a class, and they use these. If you had asked me without the data, I would have said, no, nobody uses those. But 4 out of the top 50 are in this subject area. And having the data will prevent me from weeding these titles, which are being used, but are being used by referral from a faculty, not by referral from us librarians. And there's a, there's a nice quote in here about referrals in the report. So what can we do to get people to use these things? Or should we just get rid of these things? Everybody has to make their own decision. If we can include reference in discovery systems so that instead of referring people to 1,000 journal articles on climate change, it would give them one overview encyclopedia article on climate change, I think they would get a lot more use. And I don't think reference books are dead. I think reference collections are dead. And I could, in fact, weed all the rest of the books out of that collection and integrate them into the main collection, except for a political issue. If I do that, the library will probably lose that space. So I leave books on those shelves, even though I know that nobody's using them, so it looks nice, and so that another area of campus does not grab the space. And, I didn't mention, we have circulated reference books since 2005. And why do we circulate them? Well, if somebody wants one, let the one guy who wants to use an encyclopedia take it home, because there's not like a line of people behind them waiting to use those things. So that data that I have is the circulation and in-house use. And where's reference publishing going? Well, if I was in OUP's business, I'd be a little bit nervous, because there's certain categories that I think are going nowhere. I'm not buying bibliographies. I'm not buying much print reference at all right now. But it's also going everywhere, and that if access can come from all of our other tools, we will see usage of these. But the specialness of reference is over. Having it in a prime location, ours, you walk in, and that's the other reason I leave books there. I want, when people walk into a library, to see some books someplace. And one of the things we did weed was the NUC that the guy from Arizona mentioned this morning. So there's 750 volumes weeded very easily. And they went out in glory. We had a book art exhibit, and I built trees out of them. And then they went in the dumpster. But let's put reference with the main stack so that a student looking for a subject can browse the shelves, find the reference tool next to the book, next to the criticism, next to whatever else, and then I think we'll see a lot of use. And as always, the best resources will get used, and best being defined by those that are of value to the institution, and particularly of value to the faculty who will refer students to it, like my 4 ballet encyclopedias. But the reality is most sources will not be used. And now, we tried to leave time for questions, so I'll turn it back to Trish to be the moderator. There's not much room back here.
No, okay.
Yeah.
As long as we don't fall off,
Yeah.
it's a success. So we have about 10 minutes. If we have any questions, we've got a...
And come to the mic, yeah.
Yes, please.
Hi, Bert Corelli. I'm with TrendMD, and I'm interested to know if anyone in responding to the survey talked about website features that they find useful for discovery, like you may also more like this features or related articles or additional resources. Was that at all significant?
Yeah, so one of the things that was mentioned was features on discovery systems where you might have a thing at the top or at the side. What's the... like research starters, one of them's called, which kind of picks out some kind of introductory or contextual information to kind of highlight it alongside the kind of more detailed, in-depth studies. And that, a lot of librarians said that that was useful and kind of directed users towards that kind of content. I don't think any users who we spoke to specifically mentioned it, but from talking to the librarians, it did seem to kind of encourage usage of those kinds of materials. The big question about that kind of thing is what's in it and what's out, and are you getting the things that... One of the concerns that some librarians raised about them was, are the things that we think are really the best for the students in there, or are some of them kind of left out for one reason or another? It's quite hard to kind of engineer those in a way. And a particular issue is it's difficult to engineer them in a way that's going to be suitable for a beginning undergraduate and also a specialist researcher. They need different kinds of contextual information often. So that's a real challenge. If you can get it right, it's hugely useful, it seems. But I think people are still kind of working on exactly how to design that in the most effective way.
Any other questions? Oh, okay. Could you come up to the mic so they can hear you? Thank you.
Hi. We're working on moving our reference collection to the main stacks, as you suggested. And one of our concerns is that a lot of the material can get dated, and if we don't keep track of it in the stacks, which is a lot of work, it could actually become misinformation in our stacks if our students aren't really checking dates of publication, et cetera, by the nature of what reference sources do. Have y'all thought about that, or are you working to address that in any way?
Yeah, yes, we have, and for a long time, even before the major weeding that we did, which got rid of a lot of big sets, so that's why I could get rid of 20,000. We got rid of the print dissertation abstracts. There's 1,000 volumes right there. But in the past, we would keep the current edition in reference, and for information that was still useful, and like, I use Oxford as an example. The Oxford Classical Dictionary is a fantastic source. I don't know what edition you're up to. I think it's the third, isn't it? Damon would know.
Fourth.
Okay, it's the fourth. So, but the third edition is still useful. So we would put the third in the stacks and keep the fourth in reference. And when we get the fifth, they would all sort of rotate. And in our catalog, we had notes to that effect, and that's how we managed it. Now we can cut down and have the current edition in the stacks, and we could decide to keep older editions too. And so you just have to think about the collection. Now, if it's an encyclopedia of law or medicine, you don't want a 1980s edition of that stuff sitting around, so you'd probably get rid of all the old ones and just keep the current one. But the best way to do it technologically is just put a note for the staff in the catalog record that doesn't view to the public, so that when you buy a new one or when you're looking at it, you'll see that to advise you on what your retention policy would be.
Yeah.
So then title by title.
It is title by title. And weeding of the stacks. Now, there is a full program on using data tomorrow that this is a little peek at that Kimberly, our collection librarian, and I are presenting, and which will cover other collections. But you do have to stay on top of what your collection has, and weeding is something I advocate as just a regular routine. It rarely is it done that way, but if you can keep the collection weeded, what's left will get more use.
I have one more question then.
Sure.
So when we integrate our encyclopedia sources into our discovery tools and they're labeled within the text as article, it confuses our students between an encyclopedia article, a magazine article, and a journal article, and they're not completely yet savvy on being able to decipher and look for those identifiers to distinguish them. So we're working on calling encyclopedias encyclopedia entries. So in our discovery tools, that creates a lot of confusion, and students end up having things in their bibliographies that they are not allowed to have and get marked down for. Any thoughts?
It confuses me too. We just switched. We have Ex Libris, so it's Primo, and I see it. I think it says, maybe there's other Primo users. Just off the top of my head, it says reference article, and the word article really does confuse people. I'd rather that we could change it to say something like overview or something that then they would get more use and they would serve the purpose that they were written for. But I haven't asked if we could selectively change reference to something else yet.
Yeah, can I jump in on that? So I think that point about how you label it is one of crucial importance to users understanding what type of content this is, how it's going to help them. That's crucial in making the choice to click on it and use it. From what we gathered from our interviews and studies, there's not a simple answer to this question. The problem being that, as I mentioned, the category of reference would be the natural one, but it just doesn't resonate. It's something I think publishers need to be thinking hard about, and I think in conjunction with librarians as well. If I can I skip back to the other point? Sure. About up-to-date information. I mean, this, of course, is becoming. This is one feature of the shift from print to digital, and I thought, in many ways, what Dave presented sort of showed. It gave a great kind of sense of the challenge that's going on as reference shifts from print to digital. It's not just going from one place to another, but it's becoming a different kind of thing. And one of the key expectations for reference in the digital age, almost all the users that we spoke to said this, is that they expect online material to be updated regularly, right? If they find something online, they expect it to be current. That's crucially important. It just kind of gives an indication of how much is changing as we shift from print to digital. It applies to usage as well, I think. There's such a huge difference between users having to come in physically to the library to use something and being able to access it online. So many users are working outside of the library now or just want to be able to get to things online. And so I think that kind of accounts for some of the starkness between Dave's statistics on usage of print materials and what we're seeing in the digital sphere. When users can access something easily and they sort of have an idea what it is, then that seems to be the kind of best path.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more question. If there's, great, thank you.
Nancy Pawley with the University of Vermont. We did just weed. One of my main tasks when I was hired 2 years ago was to lead my department through weeding the reference collection, and we actually got a lot of pushback. So we're finding kind of a divide between the disciplines where our humanities faculty really want the print reference, and then the sciences couldn't give a hoot. Could you speak maybe to that?
That's interesting. And if someone would approach me on my campus, I would respond by showing them the data, and the high-use areas are not in the humanities on my chart. It's health sciences, and Oh, I didn't mention earlier, those are we have reference, and then we have our reference hot topics area. The hot topics are the opposing viewpoints, and we still get those both. We get it online and in print because they get high use. But I could show people that the high use areas are in the sciences and the health sciences and the social sciences, not in the humanities. And so let's put those in the stacks so that you, as the person interested in Greek literature, can check it out, and that, I think, would diffuse that tension. But that works for me because I've been collecting data over a period of time. If you're not collecting data, my recommendation is start to collect the data. It'll take you a while. You can't just use 3 months because the assignment might be in the other semester that would use that tool. But once you've got a year or more of data, you do have a much better sense.
Thank you.
I will just mention very quickly, as we were doing the research, we kind of didn't get enough of this to say anything definitive about it, but the indications I got was that there was something of a divergence in terms of reference needs between the sciences and humanities and social sciences. They kind of seem to be moving apart, and the alternatives that you might think of are so kind of different. So there's nothing really in the humanities, there's nothing like Web of Science or PubMed. And so people just kind of going about research in really such different ways that, my sense, I can't kind of pin it down, my sense is that the kinds of needs that users have between humanities and sciences are kind of diverging all the time.
Yeah, we're finding that as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you so much to our speakers for both of those presentations. Hopefully you've been able to note the URL for the white paper, and we hope we will take a look at it, and feel free to feedback more questions going forward. We do have these postcards as well that have the URL if you'd like a little trigger to remember to download this later. So thank you all so much.